Hey, everybody. Welcome to another On the Ground with Joe Trippi. We're back on the ground in Iowa with my go-to person on all things Iowa politics, Laura Belin, who uh, is at the Bleeding Heartland blog found at bleedingheartland.com and also writes the Iowa Politics Substack, which both are must reads for me. If I'm trying to stay on top of what's happening in Iowa and Iowa politics, those are the places I go. And Laura Belin is the person I talk to. And so, Laura, we got together back in March. At the time, the races weren't who was running, who was actually going to be the nominee, particularly in the Senate race. That wasn't there, but wasn't settled. Now it has, or a lot of it's settled down. Want to get back with you, looking really forward to hearing how things have shifted from March to today and what's the outlook moving forward. So give us your overview.
It's the most exciting election cycle in Iowa that I've ever covered. And we have these open races for Senate and governor in the same year for the first time since 1968. And they're both looking really competitive. I mean, the governor's race, I think, more competitive because most people are seeing that as a toss-up right now. But the Senate race, when we talked last time, that was viewed as a likely Republican hold. And now the elections forecasters have shifted it to lean Republican. And I agree with that rating. But just this week, we saw a poll that showed Josh Turek a little bit ahead. So I can tell you that Republicans are sincerely worried about Ashley Hinson in that Senate race.
And now her district, District 2, is now, we talked about this. You pointed it out. You said, don't go to sleep on District 2. There's something happening there. So walk us through kind of the change there.
Yeah, so we had the first and third districts in Iowa, everybody knew were competitive. But the second district, it's an open seat because Ashley Hinson is running for Senate. And the Republican frontrunner at the time, now the nominee, Joe Mitchell, doesn't have deep roots in the district. He only just moved there last September, a few days before announcing his congressional bid. And even with the endorsements of a lot of insiders, including Donald Trump and Jim Jordan, he only got about 61% of the vote in the primary against a state senator, Charlie McClintock, who hardly spent any money at all. So that tells me that Republicans up there in Northeast Iowa are not super enthusiastic about Joe Mitchell. This is a district that Donald Trump carried by about 10 points in 2024. But Trump's approval has fallen considerably, and I haven't seen any recent polling specifically for the second district, but the latest poll that we had of the Senate race showed that Trump was underwater statewide. And if he's underwater statewide, he's certainly underwater in the first, second, and third congressional districts because Iowa's fourth district covering the northwest part of the state is so overwhelmingly Republican. So the Democratic nominee, it was a three-way primary in the second district, but we now know Lindsey James, state representative from Dubuque, very similar background to Abby Finkenauer, who flipped that Northeast Iowa district in 2018. But Lindsey James is a chaplain by training, and she's worked in the hospital. She speaks very openly about her faith on the campaign trail. I think it's going to be a really interesting race to watch. There are two other candidates on the ballot. There's a Libertarian, Rick Stewart, and then an independent, Dave Bashaw, who has previously worked on one of Bernie Sanders' campaigns and has been an organizer for other progressive causes. So he's running kind of a progressive populist campaign. And so those are wild cards. We don't see very many.
Can they pull votes away?
Yeah, so we don't know. But I do think that Joe Mitchell not being deeply rooted in the district is something that could cause problems for Republicans.
Yeah, well, we're seeing that a lot around the country where, for whatever reasons, mostly on the Republican side, it happens on both, but on the Republican side, a lot of people who didn't live in that district are suddenly decided to run. And then you have just sort of a split like we saw with Paxton and Cornyn between sort of establishment Republican and MAGA Republicans. And like you said, somebody getting only 61% of their primary votes, not necessarily where you want to be if you're trying to consolidate for November.
And Joe Mitchell is running, I would say, a non-traditional, or at least on a non-traditional set of issues for Republicans. I think that he senses that the traditional partisan Republican profile is not really going to play here. First of all, he's very young. He's under age 30, so he's running as a young generation, but he's campaigning on things like banning congressional stock trading and not letting former members of Congress become lobbyists. And also, he says he's not taking corporate PAC money, which is very different. A lot of Democratic candidates don't take corporate PAC money, but it is different. So I think that he's trying to orient himself as a populist. But I was really surprised that even with Trump's endorsement, that he didn't win the primary by a bigger margin.
Well, that's what I'm seeing around the country is that you can try to sort of like pull away from whatever the Republican brand is right now. I mean, and it's been very difficult. I mean, the candidates who are trying to move away from it, and it's just not working. It's not, there's definitely a schism going on. We'll see how it plays out for him there. But I agree. I mean, it will go into each race, governor, Senate, and the House races, but to get your take on where things are. And so you think the fourth, there's no way.
The fourth it's just really tough. This is a district that Trump carried by, I think, around a 30-point or close to a 30-point margin. It's just very difficult. But we have a strong candidate, Dave Dawson, who's been campaigning a lot. There was a three-way Democratic primary in the 4th district, which was unusual. Usually it's hard to even get one person to step up and run in a district like that. So I think it's important to have candidates on the ballot everywhere. And actually, Democrats are fielding more candidates in the Iowa House and Senate races, the legislative races. And I think that can only help the up ballot candidates as well.
So
I was going to say also, I'm sorry, the 4th district is open because Randy Feenstra ran for governor.
Right.
So it ended up being an uncompetitive primary because Chris McGowan, the Siouxland Chamber of Commerce head from Sioux City, he got Donald Trump's endorsement and everybody else just decided not to file. But Chris McGowan, even though I would say it's a safe district for Republicans, he's not someone who can really drive Republican turnout. Like if we think about 2018, when Steve King represented that part of Iowa, and we, of course, strongly disagreed with his odious politics. But Steve King was someone who would drive high Republican turnout.
Yeah,
he had a very serious challenge that year from J.D. Scholten. And a lot of Republicans came out in Northeast Iowa to kind of save Steve King near the end. And I just don't know. I mean, Chris McGowan must have very low name ID. And like I said, I don't see him as someone who's really going to rouse the troops.
Right. And also what we've seen everywhere, including here, is when Trump's not on the ballot, a lot of those folks don't come, unless you've got somebody like a Steve King, who has his own following, they don't necessarily turn out. So we'll see what happens there.
Right.
So let's take a look at the governor's race. I mean, how's that shaping up now that it's kind of fixed, in terms of how it's going to play out in terms of who's running.
Our working assumption in March was that it was going to be Rob Sand, the Democratic state auditor, the only current Democratic statewide elected official against Randy Feenstra. But Feenstra, Joe, worst candidate I've ever seen in my life. I mean, I was living overseas in 1998 when Jim Ross Lightfoot ran for governor and lost to Tom Vilsack. So people tell me, oh, Jim Ross Lightfoot was just as bad. But I'm telling you, I don't know how Randy Feenstra could be as bad a candidate as he is. So the Republican nominee, Zach Lane, is very different, largely unknown, I think, to most Iowans. I think even to people who follow politics a year ago, I didn't know at all who Zach Lane was. And I think that most Democrats would rather see Rob Sand running against Randy Feenstra, frankly, because Feenstra, there was just no enthusiasm for him.
Well, and also he's so lousy a candidate, he lost his own primary.
Right.
So
and I mean, he served in the legislature, so you could tie Feenstra to the unpopular policies that the legislature passed and the unpopular policies that Congress enacted. So the big bad bill, big ugly bill, whatever you want to call it. Whereas Zach Lane is, I mean, he's campaigning as an outsider, and he's campaigning on a change message that, he wants to address things like Iowa's high cancer rate and kids not staying in the state. And I feel like he gives voters a way to vote for change without voting for Rob Sand. So I think that it's still going to be a very competitive race. But and Zach Lane is also running on this Maha message. So I do think that inspires a certain amount of enthusiasm. I mean, there are Republican voters who I believe would have stayed home and not bothered to vote for Randy Feenstra, but they may come out and vote for Zach Lane. What we don't know yet is how many of those old-fashioned, I don't know what you want to call them, country club Republicans. I live live in the suburbs, those old-fashioned Republicans, are any of them going to be turned off by Lane's message? I mean, he says life begins at conception. He'd like Iowa's abortion ban to go farther. He wants to repeal all school vaccination requirements and so on. Are these policies that are going to be maybe a bridge too far? And Rob Sand is very aggressively campaigning, reaching out not only to independents, but also to Republicans. And just this week, he rolled out a big, long list of Republican endorsers.
Yeah, I saw a list of 100 Republican endorsers. He's also everywhere. He's been doing his second 100 town hall tour of the state.
Second as a candidate.
Yeah.
He did it before then, he did it for 6 years as state auditor. So he has been out there in every corner of Iowa. And when I used to go to some of these town halls when he was state auditor, he would, every time he shows up in a town, he's talking to the local newspaper, the local radio station. So he's got an image. I know that the Republicans are already attacking him, but I feel like he already built up his image as somebody people know. Zach Lane is really more of an unknown quality.
Yeah, I was in really up north near Mason City, talking to farmers up there, and I was stunned at how disgruntled they are with Republicans right now. I mean, writ large, it was not just at Trump. It was just sort of like, we're going extinct. Mm-hmm. We've lost some 92% of independent pig farmers are out of business, or and they were saying, we used to have champions for agriculture in the state. What's happened? And I was just sort of, I don't know whether they're going to vote for Democrats or not. It was clear they weren't going to vote for Hinson. To me, I don't know about whether they there was a little bit of there was a lot of. Even some of them were literally thought Walz would have been better because he would have fought for us harder or something. I mean, it was they just feel like no one's fighting for them at the, when they're under the gun for gasoline, diesel, fertilizer, everything, seed stock, anything.
Yeah, the whole Iowa delegation has voted at every opportunity to support the tariffs or keep the tariffs from coming up for a vote, to support the war or keep the war powers resolutions for coming up to a vote. So absolutely, there is no independence at all from the Iowa congressional delegation. Whereas in the past, maybe even Chuck Grassley in his first term, he was critical of the Reagan administration on some policies, and you just never hear that.
Yeah,
now.
And so that's what I'm saying. It feels to me almost like it's harder to be the change, to be one of those candidates out there talking about you're different, you're going to be a change Republican, when I just think, everybody's been towing the line. Mm-hmm. And too afraid of Trump to take anything on. Right.
Although Zach Lane is talking about these family farm issues, and like I said, he hasn't been in Congress. But both the candidates for governor are really going to be highlighting these rural issues. Right. They've both picked farmers to be their running mates. Rob Sand. And Rob Sand, he's talking, I think his latest TV ad is talking about institutional investors coming in and buying up farmland, and how he's against the pesticide immunity, giving immunity to these farm chemical manufacturers. Kind of took him a while to get around to taking a position on that issue. But the Democrats are absolutely not afraid to talk about rural issues. And when we get to the Senate race, I think that's going to be important as well.
And so, there's some structural advantages to Rob because of, how's the money side of that? Obviously he's raised a ton of money. I don't know what's going on.
Rob Sand has more money, far more money going into the general election. And he's already spent quite a lot, but he was able to come out after the primary right away. He was running several positive ads before the primary. Then he was able to come out immediately after the primary with a couple of negative ads on Zach Lane, highlighting that he lived in Kansas until relatively recently, that he still travels a lot between Kansas. He has got kids in schools in Kansas. And Zach Lane put about $2.5 million of his own money into his campaign, but they told me yesterday that he's not planning to put any more money into his campaign. So, he spent most of what he raised before the primary, and he didn't have very many in-state donors at all. Actually, he didn't have very many donors, period. He had most of the money came from himself. And he has this kind of Trumpian line of, I'm my own biggest donor, so I can't be bought. Then he had a few very large 6-figure donors and a smaller number of small donors, but a lot of those came from, like, he was on Tucker Carlson's podcast and Sean Ryan. So we got a bunch of small donations from around the country, but he doesn't have a base because he hasn't been back here. He technically moved back here a couple of years ago. I'm curious to see how this is going to work. Maybe the Republican Governors Association is going to just come in and put a huge amount of money into his campaign. But right now he does not have the infrastructure to be, raising millions of dollars from Iowans, whereas Rob Sand has this massive social media following, huge fundraising operation. And he's just, his campaign finance reports are like thousands of pages long.
Yeah,
literally.
It reminds me of some campaigns I used to do where we'd like roll in our reports like on, because there's so many people on them. And he has that kind of a following in terms of the number of people giving him money.
And he has raised a lot of money from his wife's family. He's raised, I think it's now up to around $11.5 million. And Republicans are criticizing him for that. But even if you set aside that money, Rob Sand has still broken fundraising records for non-incumbent candidates for governor.
And I also think, just what I'm seeing from the few days I'm here, when I do come in and do the on the ground thing, the number of people organizationally, because of the way he's done the tours and everything, he's got a lot of people on the ground, a lot of volunteers and people on that, more than maybe a presidential campaign or two I've seen have that kind of, bottom up kind of grassroots people in every, most towns working for him. But I think Rob's got, which when we get in the turnout differential thing, actually, he may have, that may be another leg up. I don't know.
He's got a massive volunteer network. In April, so he was going to have a primary challenger, but she didn't make the ballot. So he ended up being unopposed in the primary. Right. And in April, he had a canvas kickoff. I went down there. He talked to some volunteers. They had 16 staging locations around the state on like a cold Saturday in April, and they were going out to hit independent doors, already targeting independents to ID supporters. And the Iowa Democratic Party, largely, I think, because Rob Sand has given them a lot of money, but also I think because there are so many nationally important races here, the Iowa Democratic Party is going to have a real turnout operation like we haven't seen since Barack Obama's reelect in 2012. I was at the Democratic State Convention a couple weekends ago, and the state party chair, Rita Hart, said that for the coordinated campaign, I think she said they'd already hired 60 people in June, which we definitely have not seen. 4 years ago, was nothing like that. Even in 2018, which was a pretty good, it was an okay election for Iowa Democrats, but they did not have anything like that coordinated campaign. So between the volunteers and the paid field organizers, if there is a way to overcome that big Republican voter registration advantage, Rob Sand is well positioned to do that. Yeah,
he's running what I would call a hard count campaign where they know where they're going to know where every one of their voters are, and they're going to turn them out. Whether that's enough or not, we'll see. Right. But also, I think he's doing a better job than most people around the country at really attracting independent Republican. Not being, when he does the town halls and he asks if there's any Republicans here, and makes her, and sort of everybody applauds, like, thank you for coming. I just think he's been running a pretty big tent campaign. He's also been out there on things like the cancer rates and things that, for a long vouchers. Time. So now for Elaine to come in and go like, well, wait, I've got a plan on, to hit our cancer just out of nowhere. And I keep pointing to this. It's not just the second district. It's Lane. There is a strange thing going on this year where a lot of these Republican candidates in different states have just sort of moved there a couple of years, still have kids somewhere else. In school, it's not quite carpetbagging, but I'm not sure it's going to fly when you're trying to be the change candidate that no one, we don't know you. Do we trust you? It'll be interesting to see. And I also think Rob Sand has an advantage just because of being the auditor and the way the legislature and Kim Reynolds kind of like try to defang his office and stuff. I think people see him as, a guy who's going to take this stuff on,
He talks about that at every opportunity. And the school vouchers, Republicans passed a school voucher thing in 2023 and they've expanded it. So now it applies to everybody. And literally, I mean, you could earn $1 million a year and have luxury cars and 2 mansions. And the state is still giving you $8,000 to send your kids to private school that you could afford to spend anyway. And Rob Sand, every interview that I've seen, he's talking about our public schools declining and that we're not supporting them enough and that we're giving all this money, hundreds of millions of dollars a year, to people who don't need it. Now, Zach Lane, interestingly, he also talks about how Iowa's public schools aren't as good as they used to be. He has this kind of Republican, we need to do innovation. And he started a private school in Wichita, Kansas. So he talks about how he's going to bring all this innovation to school. So it's a different kind of message. But I think that people can see their local school districts are struggling. The funding has not kept up with inflation. And then meanwhile, private schools are expanding. They're getting all this new free money from the state. And so that's something clearly, I haven't seen the internal polling, but it's clear that the internal polling suggests that's a big issue because Rob Sand is out there talking about it all the time and has been for years.
So let's go to the Senate race. Really interested.
Oh my gosh!
How this? Because it was Zach and Josh had Zach Walls, Josh Turek. We were here. They were in a dogfight.
Yes.
And actually, when I think right after I left, the polls then showed it close, but within a couple of weeks, 3 or 4 weeks later, Turek seemed like he was pulling away, at least in the public polling.
So soon after you were here, Vote Vets got involved in that primary for Turek because even though he's not a veteran, his dad served in Vietnam and his dad's exposure to Agent Orange is probably why he was born with spina bifida. So Vote Vets came in and spent about $10 million for pro-Turek messages. And that is a lot for a state like Iowa. Yeah. So that is where I think in April is when the polls started flipping. And, the perception was that Turek was just a stronger general election candidate because he had won twice in a district that voted for Trump, a very tough Iowa House district in Council Bluffs, kind of a white working class dominated area. And the polling that I've seen is that the more people learn about Turek, the more they're very inspired by his stories. So, and that just seems to be, he's still less well known than Ashley Hinson. So I think that he has room to grow. Now, Ashley Hinson's primary was very interesting because she was up against this guy, Jim Carlin, former state legislator who ran against Chuck Grassley in 2022. And Jim Carlin got about 26.5% of the vote against Grassley and about the same 25% against Hinson. I wondered if it would be less because I thought, well, maybe in 2022 there were people who thought Chuck Grassley was getting too old. But Jim Carlin, absolutely hardcore MAGA, election denier, lots of very anti-establishment. And we see this anti-establishment streak in the Republican electorate. I think it's not just in Iowa, but it's very visible in Iowa. And Jim Carlin, after the primary, came out with a statement that said, I can't in good conscience recommend that you vote for Ashley Hinson because conservatives need to show that we have someplace to go and we have leverage and we don't need to just go along with an establishment candidate. And there is definitely going to be a libertarian on the ballot for the Senate race. His name is Thomas Lane, Laehn, different from Zach Lane, the nominee for governor, Lahn. I think that, frankly, it's possible that some Republicans may accidentally vote for Thomas Lane. But I went back and looked at all the Senate races since 2014. And whenever there were independent or libertarian candidates on the ballot, they combined to get around 3 to 4% of the vote. Thomas Lane, he hasn't raised a lot of money. He's got some creative social media videos. He's running on a message that I think could really appeal to disaffected conservatives against eminent domain abuse, against the CO2 pipeline, highlighting that Ashley Hinson has taken campaign donations from Bruce Rastetter, who's the main figure behind the pipeline. And so if I'm a disaffected Carlin voter, I do think that most of them will vote for the Republican nominee. But now they look at their ballot and they have a place to go. They can vote for the Libertarian. In 2022, when it was just Chuck Grassley against Mike Franken with no third party on the ballot, it was just like a minuscule number of write-ins, like less than 0.2% write-ins versus 3%, maybe 4%. I don't know what's realistic, but that gives Josh Turek a path to winning with less than 50% of the vote statewide.
Yeah, I remember that Grassley Franken. Doug Jones and I both flew out here and campaigned around the state for Franken. It was a heartbreaker for me. I was really hopeful, but Turek, I think, really has a real shot. I mean, I know it's still going to be an uphill battle, but if he's actually already in a little bit of a lead in the public stuff,
I have not seen any poll showing Hinson at or near 50%. She's been kind of mired in the mid 40s in all the polling I've seen. And Republicans may discount this poll that just came out because it was by a Democratic firm, but showed Turek a little ahead, 47-45, and it showed Republicans ahead on the generic ballot, like the mirror image, 47-45. But I haven't seen, I mean, I'd be happy to publish any internal polling they have that contradicts that.
right?
And I haven't seen it. I saw one of my contacts just sent me, I always love when people send me the political mail that they get the pictures of. So Americans for Prosperity Action already has a positive mailer out for Hinson in June, which is, I mean, they spend money on Iowa races, but I thought that was fairly early for talking about how she's above partisan politics and she gets results for Iowans and all this stuff. And I thought, well, their polling can't be that great if they're out there trying to boost her positives in June.
Right. And like I said, I think it's just going to be very hard for any Republican to say I'm above partisan politics, not because of that person. They may well be, but because of the just environment writ large of the entire Republican Party going lockstep with everything that Trump wants to do. It's hard. Oh yeah, sure. You'll be one, because you'll be really one of those that's really concerned about where the direction of your party's going. I mean, we'll see, but I don't think independent, like I said, all the polling I've seen, independents are leaning pretty hard away from Trump and MAGA and Republicans right now.
If they turn out. I mean, independents, I wanted to say about Ashley Hinson, she's very polished. She's a former TV news reporter and anchor. So she doesn't make a lot of mistakes. But one thing that I think she could be vulnerable on is she frequently goes on Fox or Newsmax or these other things. And she's tried to be joined to the hip with Donald Trump. So, I mean, you could just do a series of, you could do a whole 30-second ad of just clips of Ashley Hinson saying, Trump is one of the greatest presidents and he's going to usher in the golden age. That's literally a phrase she's used, the golden age. Oh. Well, we're not there right now. I mean, I know that the Republicans are hoping that gas prices are going to be coming down, but like you said, for farmers, I mean, they already, it's spring planting is done for them.
Yeah. And then I remember I had just seen the Economist poll, YouGov poll that showed Trump at the time, this is like a month ago, it showed Trump had his approval was -14 in Iowa.
That's I mean, wow, that would be surprising.
And what was fascinating, but what was fascinating about it, so I mean, I'm not saying that the -14 is accurate, but I'm just saying poll came out -14. Next day, Hinson was out saying how honored she was to have Donald Trump's endorsement. And I actually posted on X, please no one tell her that Trump's approval is underwater in Iowa right now. Whether it's 4 points or 14, I think it's clearly underwater right now.
It's clearly underwater. And Josh Turek is very well spoken. He has a deep knowledge of the issues, especially healthcare, because he is a lifelong beneficiary of some of the important programs like Medicaid. So he could talk about those issues all day long, and why the vote for the big beautiful bill is harmed. It's probably I don't have a firm number, but I'm sure it's more than 10,000 Iowans who've lost their health insurance because of the Obamacare subsidies not being extended, and then the Medicaid cuts. We are already seeing rural clinics close, and hospitals no longer doing labor and delivery. So all of those are going to be very salient issues.
Is that what helps him in rural Iowa, or is it his story? What do you think?
He has a very appealing story. He's a 4-time Paralympian, and he's a very hardworking candidate, but he's very conversant in the rural issues as well. I mean, he was in the legislature, even though the Democrats are deeply in the minority, so they can't get anything passed. But he was part of a group of Iowa House Democrats who, they introduced legislation on things like right to repair for farmers and some other, I think they called it like the Farm Independence Act or something, this package of bills. But he's very knowledgeable about talking about rural issues. So I think that they're just not going to be ceding any ground. And of course, the urban areas in Iowa, which Democrats really depend on having high turnout, I think that they will get the turnout that we didn't have in 2022. partly because of the investment in the GOTV, but also just the Polk County, which is where Des Moines is. The Polk County Democrats are just extremely well organized, like I haven't seen in my life.
I agree. The one thing I think it's almost like a presidential, like kind of hard count organization across the state right now. Between Turek, the party, and the governor's race, I just think that and all these competitive House races now. At least on the Democratic side, you can see how that organization could actually deliver this time.
Yes.
And so far around the country, like we just had the primaries in Alabama, where Democratic turnout where there was no race really, Democratic turnout was 116% higher than in 2022. On the Republican side, where they had sort of a real tough primary for governor, and lots of money, millions of dollars spent, and two people going at it, they declined 25% in turnout since 2022. So there's definitely an energy thing. I don't know again whether that's whether that'll translate here, but so far everywhere I've seen it, we've seen more energy on the Democratic side and less energy on the Republican side. And also on the partisan thing, because of how partisan the legislature and the leadership is, governor, et cetera, here, I'm not sure how much people are going to buy that this new Republican guy will be different than how they've been running the state all this time.
Yeah. I mean, Republicans have a few things going for them. They have this massive voter registration advantage, which they didn't have before. In 2018, the parties were more at parity. And in 2022, maybe it was like a 60,000 or so registration advantage. It's now approaching 200,000. Right. But I think that Donald Trump activated a lot of people who are not reliable voters, or maybe even just were non-voters. And as you say, we don't know that they will vote in a midterm. And just generally, I mean, I think Ashley Hinson is like a fine, solid candidate. But again, I don't see her as someone who's really going to be driving turnout statewide for Republicans. And then if you look at all of their candidates for the U.S. House races, none of them, I think, are strong enough to really drive the Republican turnout. So we could see lower turnout than usual for Iowa, at least for Republicans in a midterm, whereas the Democrats we have not been considered a swing state the last 3 presidential elections, so we didn't have all these people on the ground like there are this year. So we'll see what happens.
It came to the point where because there's no presidentials, that you had to build it. Rob Sand and the party had to build it for this election, and I think they all of them have. I mean, not just Rob, but the House candidates, et cetera. And then, we're running out of time. So I wanted to get just a quick thing on the House races, and also the legislature. Does all this have a possibility of changing the House, the state House at all, or is it? Yeah, I mean, so get your take on that.
So the Republicans have very large majorities in the Iowa legislature, so it's not realistic that Democrats could take control, but definitely the Democrats could cut into those majorities. The 1st and the 3rd congressional districts, which we haven't talked about. So Marionette Miller Meeks, one of the worst Republican incumbents in terms of underperforming the top of the ticket. She barely won even in a district that Trump carried by 8.5 points. So she's facing Christina Bohannon again. She had a Republican primary challenger who got around 29% of the vote in the primary. So again, big question mark whether all of those people will leave the line blank or vote for Miller Meeks. There is an independent candidate, Michael Bridgeford, in the 1st district. He's running kind of as a Joe Manchin, middle of the road type of person. So I'm not sure. I don't know how visible he's going to be and who he takes votes from. The 3rd congressional district, I would say I'm possibly the most optimistic about of all the congressionals. This is a district that Zach Nunn, the incumbent, carried by about 4 points, similar to Donald Trump's. He won by about 4 points. And I know Donald Trump must be deeply underwater in the 3rd district. That includes the Des Moines Metro. There may or may not, probably won't be a Libertarian on the ballot, but Sarah Trone Garrett, the Democratic nominee, running a very strong campaign. Polk County, the Des Moines Metro, and Dallas County, containing some of the suburbs, make up about 3/4 of the vote. Democrats are very well organized in both places. And Zach Nunn is already on TV with a 60-second very positive, almost like a biographical ad, which shows me that his people realize that his favorables are not good and they need to bring those up. And I think that it's symbiotic. I think that the competitive congressional races will help the legislative candidates, but I also think that a lot of the strong legislative candidates will help up ballot.
Right.
I know that helped Cindy Axne in 2018. And if I have time for just two more races, I want to flag.
Yeah.
Attorney General, two more statewide races, Attorney General and Secretary of Agriculture. I was one of the few states that elects a Secretary of Agriculture. Of course, all of the statewide candidates in Iowa depend on Rob Sand doing very well. But the Attorney General's race, we have a pretty unpopular Brenna Bird, first-term Republican. She was just at the Capitol this past Saturday saying that, Iowa's done well on against abortion, but we have more to do, and she'll always be on the front line. So she would like a total abortion ban. And we have a strong candidate, Nate Willems, running Jones County. Jones County
my
native.
county.
That's your space. But he's a labor attorney, and he's running on a message of like, hey, let's get the Attorney General's office actually working for working people and trying to recover stolen wages and do the consumer protection work instead of getting involved in all these political lawsuits. And the Secretary of Agriculture race is very interesting because Chris Jones, retired research scientist from the University of Iowa, he is making this a referendum on clean water. And he has really done a lot for years to elevate, way before he was a candidate, just as an author, to elevate the issue of water quality. And he's out there saying, hey, if you think Iowa's water is in great shape, vote for the other guy. But this race is about clean water. And I noticed on the last set of financial reports that this group, the Republican State Leadership Committee, which supports like not the governor and the AG, but the other Republican statewide officials, they gave $150,000 to the campaign of the current Secretary of Agriculture, whereas the Secretary of State, they gave him $10,000.
Right.
So I don't know what their internal polling is showing, but I think that they're worried that clean water is an issue that resonates with Iowans. It's why Rob Sand talks about it. It's why Zach Lane talks about it. And it is definitely going to be on the ballot this fall in Iowa in a way that I haven't seen before.
Yeah, no. Well, thanks for the Jones County shout out.
Yeah.
Just for those of you who don't know, it was 46 years ago that I was working as a $15 a day organizer in Jones County, Iowa, running around Anamosa and Monticello and Olin, Iowa. I remember it actually was very, foundational year in my, that got me into national politics. But I've always loved the state.
It's a lovely area up in Northeast Iowa. So.
Well, Laura, thank you so much. Any last thoughts or tell people where they can find you again at your blog and the Substack? Yeah,
bleedingheartland.com, where I publish my own work, and then I publish work by more than 100 guest authors every year. Just had an interesting piece about Iowa's Bellwether County. And then on Substack, I'm at Iowa Politics with Laura Belin. That's where you can find my weekly radio show that I do for KHOI Community Radio in Ames, as well as some deep dives that I cross-post over from Bleeding Heartland.
Cool. Well, I'm going to check out the Bellwether County. Which one is it? It is Des Moines County, where Burlington is. And with in the 2020, 2022, and 2024, they were the closest to the statewide result. Okay.
And then close runner-up status would go to Clinton and Muscatine counties. Also, among those Mississippi River counties with mid-sized cities that I'm so interested in. And these are among, Iowa has about 24 counties that voted Obama, Trump. And these are among those.
Because you've been pointing out there was the mid-sized cities where Democrats really took the biggest hits. So
yes, and the first congressional district in southeast Iowa has the largest number of those mid-sized cities between Burlington and Clinton and Muscatine and Keokuk. But Ottumwa, which is now in the 3rd congressional district, they've had some health clinic closures, and it's the 3rd largest county in that 3rd congressional district, and Sarah Trone Garrett is absolutely doing a lot of campaigning down there. Well, thanks for your insight. Thanks, everybody, for joining us. If you've been following the On the Ground episodes at all, we dropped a bunch in Texas. You'll never know where I'll show up next or who I'll be talking to, but it's always with people like Laura that have been insightful and tell you what's actually happening, give you a sense of what's actually happening on the ground. We'll see you next time. Thank you for joining us.